my question is, are you potentially okay? So let's say they sign Klay to an extension, they line him up with Steph and Draymond, same with Steve Kerr. More so about the big three. Are you okay with the possibility of your heroes becoming zeros? And that is, if by the time they're at the end of their contract, their powers have diminished. Curry's going to be 38 by the end of his deal. Klay Thompson, Draymond, 36. They won't be as great. At least I think it's going to be very hard for them to be as great then, even as they are now. Are you okay with watching those three guys finish their careers, but not finishing as we remember them? Like that's kind of, I think sometimes it sounds great to see someone ride off into the sunset, but very rarely do athletes have a Kobe Bryant like 60-point game in their final game in the NBA. Very rarely do the Tim Duncans get to win a championship just before they retire. That doesn't happen all the time. In fact, oftentimes you see the ones and the athletes that are so important to your lives kind of just be a shell of themselves.
Yeah, and you got to be okay with that. And I think maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I think the majority of Golden State Warrior fans are ready for that. They're getting prepared for that, and they're okay with it. I think most Warrior fans want those three guys to retire Warriors, even if the back end might not look great. And I can't hate on that. I can't. I mean, I would have loved to have seen some of the great players play a little longer. I would have loved to see Bird play longer for the Celtics, but he couldn't. He physically was debilitated. So I maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's a percentage of fans that are so kind of cold, not cold and calculating, but yeah, I guess there are some fans that'd be like, no. I'm with Bill. Get rid of Bill Walsh. Get rid of him a year early rather than a year late. I don't want to be stuck. I think most of the Warrior fans are willing to ride this out and would be willing to have those three guys retire Golden State Warriors, even if the last year or two isn't very successful.
I mean, I think I would be too, but it's just for the possibility of, generally we see the greats like, Kobe had a farewell tour. Famously, Draymond Green said Paul Pierce doesn't get a farewell tour because they don't love you like that. Someone like Mariano Rivera at every single city he went to, or Derek Jeter, the greats that have played in one location for their entire careers generally get the love and respect in their final farewell tour from everywhere they go. That, to me, would be something pretty cool to witness, not just for one athlete, but it would be for all three of them.
Right.
And that would be extremely unique. Something that I have not seen before. And to me, that would be the one thing that I would be all right with watching over the next three. I mean, yes, I expect them to compete for a title this year, and then it probably continues to go down the hill, the back end of the dynasty. But if they do align themselves together, and they do ride out together, the way I hope they can, well, then we might be able to see something special that overshadows the fact that they're probably not champs anymore.
I think that's possible for sure. 510, and see, this is where you can always turn over a new leaf. This might have triggered me a little bit in the past, but I'm gonna use it as a springboard.
You're better.
I'm gonna use it as a springboard into possibly a conversation. 510, not extending the head coach of Team USA, in addition to the Warriors, who's a 9-time champion. Has to be one of the dumbest takes I've ever heard. USA! Now, I didn't say don't do it. I didn't say don't do it. What I said was, do you want Steve Kerr to be the coach of your team if the big three is winding down and it must be transition time? And I'm not saying that's this year. It could be next year. It could be 2 years from now. Is it unfair to ask, I guess would be the way I would phrase it to the 510. Is it unfair to ask whether Steve Kerr would be the best coach for the Warriors as this thing winds down? That's got to be a fair question, doesn't it?
I don't think that's unfair of a question, but to me the biggest factor in the solution is Steve Kerr. I think one of the reasons that Bob Myers is no longer with the Warriors is because, in addition to maybe not getting the offer he wanted when he wanted it, having to go through the turmoil of last season, the added stress of course, built up over a decade that he's been with the organization, he might have also just been done. And Steve Kerr, to the 510's point, listing his resume as the head coach of Team USA, 9-time champion, 4 times with the Golden State Warriors. Maybe Steve Kerr is looking for another challenge in his life as a coach. It could just be with Team USA. It could be maybe he's done this for a long time and he doesn't want to anymore, or he doesn't feel like the juice is worth the squeeze. I think we have to allow for that a possibility as well. It's not just do the Warriors want him, but does Steve Kerr want the Warriors?
I think he'd want the Warriors for 3 more years at $40 million. And the bottom line is that's the other thing that's a factor in here, and it's the Monty Williams contract.
Oh, and the Popovich deal.
Yes, and the Popovich deal. 888-957-9570 is the number. We're talking some Golden State Warriors basketball and whether or not it's a priority or it should be a priority for the Warriors to get Kerr and Klay Thompson locked up before the season. I mean, if you lock these guys up before the season, you've got Steph, Klay, Dre, and Kerr all going to be with us for at least another 3 years. I'm not saying that's good or bad. In fact, I think what I'm hearing from Warrior fans is we can live with that, and what happens, happens. Yes, but
I'm trying to think in the history of the NBA, has there ever been a coach to stick through this long from one iteration? So bringing in that old guard, they leave, and that head coach sticks around, because we're seeing with Popovich right now, and has not been successful post Duncan, Kawhi, I almost said Kyrie, Kawhi, Tony Parker, all that stuff. Maybe Spoelstra? That's the only one I could think of that's been able to get back to the finals with a whole new iteration post LeBron, D-Wade, Chris Bosh, all them.
Yeah, that's a good question. Or a coach who won some titles, hung around, struggled maybe with a different team, but stuck it out, and it's a good question.
Never happens. They always usually leave. Phil Jackson, he left the Lakers, right? Maybe those old Celtics teams, you could speak on that. They left, Auerbach, all that sort of stuff. I can't think of any situation in the NBA at least.
What about like Rick Carlisle? He won a title, then he didn't do anything.
But didn't he kind of just hang on as long as Dirk Nowitzki did?
Yeah, he did. He did.
And I think the difference between a Popovich situation, and even Spoelstra to some extent, than Steve Kerr, as Steve Kerr has entered the league with those big 3, none of them have left yet.
Right.
Meanwhile, Greg Popovich, yes, he's been through Duncan and even further back Robinson, through Kawhi, and then now what he's got built there now with Wembanyama. But Greg Popovich is also the president of basketball operations. So he makes every single decision for his team year in and year out. Eric Spoelstra was pretty much brand new and fresh, even though he'd been within Miami. So the other understanding about the LeBron James and the Heatles era was that was going to end, and it was not going to be a decade-long relationship. Even if LeBron had stayed in Miami, Bosh or Wade would have moved on because those guys were a little bit older. So Spoelstra, to me, was always going to be involved there, and he's under Pat Riley.
Right.
So that's the other relationship there. I don't know if Steve Kerr has any real allegiance now that Bob Myers is gone to someone in that front office, of course, than the guy who signs his checks, Joe Lacob.
Yeah. Louise Roberson, I'd rather have them diminish here in their old age and comfort and security with us. I think most Warrior fans are with Louise there. Chengers says, you said you wouldn't want to re-sign him. No, what I said was, do you want to re-sign? The reason I would, first of all, I didn't say not to re-sign him, but I would think that, do you want Steve Kerr here see, here's what I think. And you were the first guy who said this, that it resonated with me. I think there's a very real possibility the Warriors could have Kerr another 3 years. They re-sign Klay or extend Klay. So now it's like we have Curry for 4, Klay for 4, Draymond for 4, Kerr for 3 or 4. Okay, that's great. But I don't know that that's where they exactly want to go. What I'm saying is, if you do that, I'm still with you. It doesn't mean they're all retiring here in 3 or 4 years. It means we've got you all under contract for 3 or 4 more years. Let's see how this year goes. And if this year goes well, however that's determined, guess what? We'll come back again next year with the same guys. But if things go sideways, let's say they extend Klay, re-sign Kerr, and things go sideways this upcoming year. I don't know what that means, but they do. It's over at that point, right? They'll trade somebody. They'll get off one of the big 3. Maybe Kerr would even get fired. I don't know.
Yeah, I do think that if you re-sign Klay or extend Klay and Kerr, the one thing you can guarantee in my mind is that you have a 100% buy-in from everyone. Because right now, Klay Thompson is playing under a final year of his contract. Like, there are things that he has to think about on a daily basis that he otherwise wouldn't if he was locked up.
Yeah.
So you guarantee, again, with the off-season direction and the moves, you guarantee that everyone has bought in on this one season. But that also, in my mind, makes me think that it is year to year. Like from here on out, it is year to year.
Yeah.
There is less vision for the future than there ever has been during this dynasty. And that's natural. That's what happens towards the end of these things. But that also means that they can end in the snap of a finger.
Yeah.
If someone has a catastrophic injury, if the team doesn't have a catastrophic injury but shows that it can't even get back to the second round next year, well, then if you're Joe Lacob, you have some very difficult decisions to make. And it's not just, oh, well, I guess we'll bring them all back and we'll just ride this thing out for 3 years, because I don't think that's the kind of person he is.
I would agree. If he's gonna, like, Joe Lacob to me is the kind of owner who would say, okay, all right, let's go ahead and pay Klay. Let's go ahead and bring Steve back for 3 or 4 years. We're all in on the big 3 this year.
Mm-hmm.
But all bets are off if you guys don't continue, if you stop producing.
Well, especially because Chris Paul is, in all likelihood, not going to be a member of the Warriors beyond 1 year.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how they would pitch to him continuing to sign 1 year deals, because that's the only thing that logically and financially makes sense. But you also got Chris Paul in the first place so that you could get off of $30 million before the new CBA kicks in. So you can't go and just replace that player with someone younger, better, who also makes $30 or more million. So yes, that's why this year does line up to be their best crack. And then you're just hoping that someone like Jonathan Kuminga takes a massive step this year. And then you don't even have to worry about filling that void of Chris Paul, because you got your next iteration. You got Moses Moody flashing signs. Maybe Trace Jackson-Davis turns out to be a player for you this year. Brandon Podziemski does great in the G League, and he shows himself to be someone that could run a second unit next year and the year after that. And then you have somewhat of a vision of a bridge to what you want to become. But again, that doesn't involve, to me, that the big 3 must have to be around for 3 years, even if you extend all of them.
Right. Yeah, it's where the Warriors are at is an incredibly unique spot, and how they handle it, there's no one way to do it. There just isn't. And maybe they've already made mistakes that they don't even realize. Maybe we'll find out, hey, they already made a mistake that's going to kill them by extending Draymond Green. Well, Steiny, how do you know that? Well, maybe he gets hurt. He's never the same.
Or maybe he's not as invested.
Exactly. Or maybe re-signing Draymond for 4 years is the move that galvanizes this team, that makes everybody recommit to the big 3, that makes the chemistry better this year. Because, look, if you're a young, I think let's take a guy like Jonathan Kuminga last year and this year. Like, he's got to go into this year with his eyes wide open. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm Jonathan Kuminga, I'm going into this season saying, I ain't getting no favors done for me this year. None. Like, he's got to go in that way rather than expecting something, because he's going to probably be behind guys who have more experience than him. Wiggins, for example.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, Draymond Green, the way that Anthony Davis's supermax extension is looking, and Jaylen Brown making $300 million, maybe $25 million a year is a discount. And he actually did the Warriors a favor.
Max Carlos on the YouTube chat. What's everyone worried about?
Did you watch last season?
You hear that, Max Carlos? Did you watch last season? I'm not worried about the Warriors, but to ignore where they are kind of in their history and where they are in the dynasty, I mean, I'd be worried. Like, if not this year, next year, if not next year, you know what I mean? How could you not be worried? Steph Curry's entering his 15th year in the league. I mean, that's why you worry. You worry what's going to happen in a couple years. Like, that to me is natural, and it's not a negative.
But I also think, too, because of the direction, like, I am taking this thing, as I think the Warriors are, year by year.
Right.
So, and there's no offense, like, I'm not thinking about 2 or 3 years down the road. I don't have as much foresight in this scenario as you do. And that's not to say that your opinion is invalid. Like, I think there are reasons, if you're an optimist, you have reasons to feel good. If you're a pessimist about where the Warriors are at, you have ammunition, if you really want to use it, to feel that way. Me, I'm choosing to look at this season as that's it. That is all I am focused on, and everything after is going to be determined based on this year. That's why I have a hard time looking 2-3 years down the road.
I think that's fair. Then we get into the question of if they bring everybody back and if they extend everybody and it doesn't work, well, what are you going to be able to get for those guys if you're willing to move off them at that point?